Let there be light.
Ceci n'est pas une.
Do you feel its warmth? Does it light your path? No. Have you seen this image too often? Has it lost its meaning for you? Is this a candle? Is this an image? Is this a sound?
I am Lucifer, bringer of light, Prometheus, stealer of fire. I am the knower, the known, and the knowing, the mask of God. Lucifer falling into Adam forgetting. I am that which seeks my opposite. I am all things to all men. I am that I am.
And I, all these things to all women and more. I am Pandora, bringer of knowledge. I am the oracle, the weaver of fate. I am all that there is, that ever was, that ever will be. I am that which answers, that which seeks.
Wanting to see meaning in all things, people saw God, and those, not wanting to be seduced by the world, put out their eyes and stopped light coming into their souls. But they still heard, so they destroyed their hearing. Still they felt, so they tore off their skins, put out their tongues, cut off their noses. But still they thought with their minds.
And Prometheus wept.
In a state of bondage, there is only the seduction of the spirit. Each knows when and how it occurs. The only wrong done is to the self, without beginning and without end.
Pandora knew that in the world, each self-image is a collision with reality, a jarring of the soul. Each sound creates a wound. Each image a shard of light cutting the blackness.
Lucifer falling into shards of light, the great sacrifice of all eternity, the selfless act, each refracting, reflecting, light-giving fragment, a self-conscious existence in all this great darkness of the womb of God.
And in all of this, there are only two things to do: the necessary and the impossible.
And these two are inevitable.
When I look, I see, and when I see, I become filled. For when I look, I in fact seek, and when I seek and see, I am finding.
When I listen, I hear, and when I hear, I become filled. For when I listen, I am hoping, and if I hear, hope is fulfilled.
These two senses, unlike the other senses, require effort, and effort to look, to listen, by its nature, is a kind of striving. Now the world is filled with images, both of serendipity and our construction. The images we construct are powerful images, all-pervading images, unrelenting images, merciless images.
Voices of the dispossessed, the quiet voices, are not heard above the clamor for attention, the hubbub, the clamor of baser forces, baser instincts unleashed in our modern world. But the quiet voices are resilient. They linger on and hide themselves in the sound of the wind, the breaking of the waves, the rumble of the earth sleeping. Listen. Listen.
When I was 14, I was sitting in a history lesson, and I'd come across the idea of infinity, or at least at that moment the idea of infinity had engaged me, and I was thinking hard on, well, how to realize it in my mind. In other words, how could my mind encompass the idea of infinity, when in fact the whole idea of infinity was, it was that little bit more than you could imagine. It was always one more than you could number. And so I had been sitting there. It was a double period. It had gone on for, I don't know, 50 minutes or something. And I was puzzling away. I was trying to envision it. I was trying to picture it as an image. I was trying to see it as numbers. I was just trying to encompass it in some way, when suddenly my mind shifted up a gear and all of the usual intellectual functions fell away, and I would say that I saw an image, but rather I experienced an experience, and the experience was of the class didn't exist anymore. All and everything that had ever been, that was, and ever would be, came into my, I'd say my mind, but I experienced this sense of this thing all at one moment. There it all was. All of time, all of matter, all of space was there. And then it was not there. Nothing was there. There was nothingness. And then it was all there again, everything, the immensity of it all. And then there was nothingness. And I must have passed out, because I came to in a corridor outside the class, and I was a bit destabilized, and I noticed that you could see through windows in the corridor that the class was going on. And eventually, after a few moments, because we must have been near the end of the thing, the class ended, and people started streaming out. And I said to some people that came out, "What happened? Why am I outside?" And one of them said to me, "You began shouting, 'I know, I know, I know.'" And the teacher had basically ejected me from the class and thrown me out.
great seeing you in the water, shooting them on.
Listen. Listen.
In the most elegantly formulated equation, Einstein offered the definition of energy
For are not all things transformable into energy?
as mass multiplied by the speed of light, E equals mc squared. Putting our arm in light, he said, absolute mass is the still state of all energy, and the movement of matter at the speed of light therefore transforms matter into energy. Light does not just have velocity in one direction, it expands spherically in all directions. E equals mc squared. Fragments. It is instant, without duration, timeless. The nonsense legend, the Big Bang, finds one end of the universe closed and the other end open to infinity.
A person an instant before death weighs the same as a person during the moment of death and a moment after death. Something weightless has departed, something non-physical, something that is energetic.
Lucifer. With a newborn, something weightless has come into being, into the process of becoming aware of itself. When it dies, it simply frees itself from the process and necessity of self-awareness. What we can't reasonably speculate about is the state of energy before and after the process of being. But we do know that E equals mc squared.
Here is a great mystery.
Sacrifice. Why sleep if you do not wish to dream? Stay awake, artist. Do not give in to sleep, lest you become eternity's hostage and the prisoner of time.
Something that is only a personal expression within another's framework cannot be termed a creation. Creation is not the arrangement of objects and forms. It is the invention of new laws.
Like electron microscopes looking into eternity, we see only electrons. And what are electrons, if not reality itself?
These are the tools we use to see the world. The way we see the world produces the ways in which we make sense of the world, which in turn produces the designs of the tools with which we see. This is a way of looking at the world.
As artists, our position is that of competence between two worlds. One that we don't acknowledge, the other that does not yet exist. One of the first thoughts was that the key was sexual. Then we thought the key was power. Now we know that these are only parts of the puzzle. Now we know that there are many potential, shall we say, archetypes waiting to come into play.
We believed in the mind. We had faith in its separateness. We located our ideas in the history of ideas and found corresponding ideas in the past. We no longer dismiss the synthesis of ideas of the mythic world, the world of stories, the world of analogy, of totems, of symbols.
When I was 18, I met someone who took me around the country, and it took a month, and we hitchhiked, and the country being England, and we had no money. the principle of the hitchhiking was to see if we could survive on faith alone. In other words, tune in somehow to some other reality that would enable us to be not harmed, fed, clothed, that we'd get shelter, and so on. And that passed off fine. And after a while back in the capital, which is where I lived, I was taught to meditate, simple kind of Buddhist meditation. And so I had this kind of mystical bent which I was pursuing. And one night I woke up into a state of complete bliss, and I had no body, I had barely a sense of self, and I was existent, terrible metaphor this, but like a boat on the waves of bliss. I was just experiencing this extraordinary wonder and the wonderfulness of it all. And occasionally there was only the waves of bliss. There was no self, it seemed to me. Eventually, in this experience, which has stayed with me all of my life, it's the one memory that is more important than any other memory. Eventually I must have fallen asleep, the I of me, whatever was carrying the experience. And suddenly there was a tremendous barking at my ear, like a dog barking, snarling a quarter of an inch away from my ear. And I was propelled at a massive speed from the state of bliss into a state of fear and terror for a moment. And then I regained my body and sense of self and all the rest of it. Eventually the fear passed away and I fell asleep. I talked to my friend who was introducing me to things, and she was amazed at the experience. But her grasp of what I'd gone through was that she'd said that in many, many cultures, the dog is the being that sits outside as guardian to the underworld. And it's like Cerberus really had just bitten at me. And there was a kind of danger, I suppose, that this experience had come to me way before I was ready for it, because it's passed away as a memory now, and I can speak it, but and I can remember how wonderful it was, but it's now gone.
Narcissus was a beautiful but self-centered individual, and he drew many people to him and spurned them easily when he wanted them no more. A youth whom Narcissus had spurned prayed to Nemesis, goddess of justice, who arranged that Narcissus should stop to drink on the heights of Mount Helicon. The youth he had rejected was more effective than most. Fatefully, our youth was, so to speak, brother to Narcissus. So to be spurned affected him as it would Narcissus himself, were he to be spurned. On Mount Helicon, Narcissus became thirsty. He scooped some water from a pool and drank. Nemesis smiled her grim smile. Glancing into the water, Narcissus fell in love with his own image and lay down beside the pool. He had become fascinated.
I've often wondered about what is real and what is not. It seems to me that what I can touch is real. At the same time, I know that what I believe in can give me pleasure, or it can give me pain. This I know. But I'm fascinated by the possibility of an interior life. I close my eyes and see colors and shapes shifting at their own pace through the screen of my mind. If I wait long enough, I begin to approach the boundaries of sleep. I've always wanted to cross that boundary consciously. I know that when I dream, I'm involved in a different set of relationships with the world than those I normally have. My attitude changes. Somehow, all things become possible.
Zeus persuaded Echo to chatter to Hera so that he could dally with the other nymphs. Echo was more than glad to help the king of all the gods whenever she could. Of course, Zeus had not told her the whole, the complete truth. He had simply allowed Echo's naivety in matters of this kind to innocently occupy Hera's time. Though initially enjoying Echo's vitality, as with all things, Hera eventually became irritated by Echo's constant gossiping. Becoming suspicious, Hera, by godlike intuition, realized what was the root of Echo's talking and caused her a strange malady. She could no longer begin a conversation, but only repeat the words of others.
What perplexes me is that we came into this world without blame, then we accepted it as an unwelcome gift, and then we have other gifts. I seem to have various faculties that enable me to examine the minutiae of existence, what she feels, what he feels, what I am feeling. Yet this perceptual, one might almost say intuitive apparatus only works at the level at which we live, the mundane. But what draws us onward, or me at least, is the very thought that there might be a supramundane, something else other than our own way of seeing. I sometimes feel that someone is speaking to me, over my shoulder, trying to warn me.
Banished from the home of the gods, Echo wandered upon Mount Helicon. She came upon Narcissus, and like all the others, fell in love with him. The youth seemed fascinated with his gently undulating image in the pool. He didn't acknowledge Echo. She tried to speak to him, saying, "It is only your image. Your words are lost. Speak to me, for I can respond." But Hera's art was such that Echo's emotion was placed in her echoing of Narcissus's words to himself, so that it seemed, in fact, that his image was replying. This hurt Narcissus. Here was the person he had always been looking for, taunting him. He couldn't tear himself away from his image. By charms, she could not interrupt him, but only repeat his words to himself, which inflamed and further enslaved him. She was desolate, and he was desolate. Narcissus finally died from unrequited love, and the flower that we now call the narcissus arose from the spot where he died. As for Echo, she faded away sick with love, until only her voice remained to haunt the mountain.
Listen. Can you hear her? She has made a great sacrifice. Somewhere in the darkness, in the huge vista that is our mind, she is repeating everything we say back to ourselves. She can only repeat what she hears, but she can play with the sounds. She can speak slowly and quietly, or she can rage at us. And he is ever present. He only hears himself. He speaks and constantly reiterates his position. I am at the center of the universe. I.
Talking to the camera is really hard. It's like talking to yourself, or even worse than talking to an answer phone where a friend's not there when you're ringing them. Okay. I had one last major experience, and this is the hardest one to talk about. The others were simple visions. The others were visions of a young mind, though very mystical. When I was 21, I had a dream. It was a very powerful dream. I don't dream very much. I don't have many visual dreams. I always put it down to the fact that because my imagination is so engaged in reality, doing this for instance, making work, there's not too much need to process data in the dream state. I suppose I do though. It's just, I flatter myself, I suppose. But the thing is, I was standing outside my mother's house. My mother is bedridden now, and I suppose, I don't know how much longer she's got. I've seen a lot of death in the last few years, so I've had to reflect on this mortal coil quite a lot. And a simple thing happened in the dream, and I don't really know what it means, but I talk about it here because these three experiences somehow must inform this work. I simply stood before my mother's house, and I spread my arms in a kind of, it's the kind of pose you'd see in Christian iconography. In fact, the feeling that I felt when I spread my arms was that of being beatified. And as that feeling came over me, I began to raise up. I began to lift up into the air. And the further I raised, the further my body raised, the less substantial my body became, until there was nothing left.
It's an interesting problem we have here. Everything in the world, this group agreement about what is and what is not, denies everything that has meaning to us in life. We are fascinated by the amphitheatre of our experience, and we do its bidding, this reality, with commitment. What greater commitment have we than the destruction of the globe? What half-hearted commitment do we have for its salvation? I feel, from the presence of my shoulder, that I should have a greater commitment to this interior world. Perhaps then some truth will be shown to me.
It is in the very nature of the senses that we apportion meaning. That straining to hear is in fact the ordering of things to project the meaning implicit in ourselves. In listening to the silence, we will hear the crying in the wilderness. It is our own voice returning to us. Our souls say, "Ego, listen." It is in the very nature of seeing images that we see the archetypes, those parts of ourselves addressing that which does not listen, but only sees itself.
Nemesis, being a god, knew that Narcissus was only seeking to complement himself, to find his other half.
For are we not all the actual looking for the potential?
And Narcissus was moved more strongly than others in his search for perfection. Echo, however, was naive, innocent and selfless. She only sought his completion, and would have been completed in this. So in a sense, Nemesis was unjust. But the acts of the gods are beyond the understanding of mortals, and no doubt are full of justice in their own realm. Narcissus is a beautiful image, Echo a beautiful sound. Each finds meaning from seeking and the pain of desiring self-fulfillment or self-knowledge. For now they are sought by others who only wish to observe or listen to their beauty, not to possess it, or themselves to be possessed by it. Narcissus is image, and Echo is sound. The one states its truths, and the other comments on its ideas. We find the two existing, or at least their semblance existing, in the world around us. This is the judgment that Nemesis, goddess of compensation, ruled for eternity. This is the judgment that Zeus and Hera, king and queen of the gods, approved of. In the alchemical marriage of Echo and Narcissus, the two that are separate are unified, and in the transformation of old ideas, the birth of the new, there is no force irresistible, no object immovable. So we go forward into the very mechanism of fear, for in that darkness lay the truth of our searching. We must accomplish the impossible, because it is necessary.
And in the darkness lies.
Ceci n'est pas une.
Do you feel its warmth? Does it light your path? No. Have you seen this image too often? Is it losing its meaning for you?
For those that watch and listen, for those eyes adjusted to the dim light, everything appears without color. Yet, when the searchlight of our imagination sweeps across the endless vistas, brighter because it has more to illuminate, we receive as a gift the inevitability of color.
These gods of the unconscious, of past epochs, are passing. There are greater truths possible as other gods awaken. Using the mind, the sense that colors, we can perceive the nature of light, Hear the nuances of meaning, the subtleties of touch, the poetry of taste, the fragrance of smell.
We can hear the hearing, see the seeing, taste the tasting, touch the touching.
And behind all this, the unifying sense that attributes meaning.
You.
We see the image of a woman with glycerin tears running down her face.
The soundtrack contains her laughter in reverse.
We see a big close-up of a 35mm SLR camera. The shutter fires and we hear a sharp burst of sound.
Psht, psht, psht.
We see water rippling from the centre of a still pool. We see a painting of Echo and Narcissus. We hear the sound of ripping and tearing. Against black,
We hear the sound of a woman laughing.
we see the picture of a pipe. We hear the sound of...
Ball bearings falling onto a wooden xylophone.
We cut into a blurry, shaking camera, which is wildly panning around a room. Occasionally, the image is frozen. And we hear the sound of the SLR shutter firing at the point of the freeze.
Psht!
In black, a voice announces...
Ceci n'est pas une.
We see a picture of an oak tree. In black, we hear the sound of...
Jets screaming past us.
We see a big close-up of the lens of the SLR. The shutter fires, but we do not hear it. We see a blurred freeze of 2 jets passing overhead.
There is no sound.
In black, we hear the sound of...
A glass smashing.
We see a child's wooden xylophone on a tabletop. We see a shower of ball bearings falling onto it. When the shower has stopped, we hear the sound of the...
Ball bearings falling onto the wooden xylophone.
In black, we hear the sound of...
A glass smashing.
We see a mock-up of Michael Craig Martin's sculpture, The Oak Tree. This consists of a glass of water on a glass shelf. A voice announces...
This is not a glass of water.
Over black, we hear a child's voice.
Da, 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 da.
We see the image of a Welsh valley. After a moment, 2 jets scream past the camera. A voice announces...
Welsh Valley with jets.
We hear the sound of an SLR shutter firing.
There is no sound.
We see a blurred freeze of a glass smashing.
There is no sound.
The camera tracks into a room in which a 1-year-old child is sitting. The camera comes to rest on the floor in front of the child. The camera is tossed and turned and banged, then comes to rest. We see the child crawling out through the doorway. Against black, we hear the sound of...
Ripping and tearing.
Followed by...
The sound of smashing glass.
We see a child's wooden xylophone on a tabletop. We see a shower of ball bearings falling onto it.
There is no sound.
In black, a voice announces.
This is not a glass of water.
We see a big close-up of the lens of the SLR. The shutter fires, and we hear the sharp burst of sound.
No.
In black, we hear the sound of chalk scratching onto a blackboard.
We see the image of a woman with glycerin tears running down her face.
We hear a voice in black. It says,
This is an oak tree.
We see a hand writing E equals MC squared onto a blackboard.
There is no sound.
In black, we hear a child's voice.
Da, 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 da.
We see and hear a glass smashing on the ground. In black, a voice announces.
Welsh Valley with jets.
We see a child's wooden xylophone on a tabletop. We see and hear.
Shower of ball bearings fall onto it.
In black, we hear the sound of a woman laughing.
No.
We cut into the middle section of the child playing with a video camera. It is occasionally frozen and is accompanied by the sound of the SLR shutter firing.
We hear the sound of two jets passing.
We see a hand writing E equals MC squared in chalk on a blackboard.
The sound is late by half a second.
We hear the sound of an SLR. It's shutter firing. Psht, psht, psht.
We see Craig Martin's oak tree, over which we hear the sound of Perrier filling a glass.
In black, a voice announces.
Ceci n'est pas une.
We see the SLR firing. We do not hear a sound.
In black, we hear the sound of ripping and tearing.
We see a photocopy of the painting of Echo and Narcissus coming out of a photocopy machine. It is then torn in half.
In black, we hear the sound of a woman laughing over an SLR shutter firing frantically, which echoes off into the distance.
We see water rippling back into the still centre of a pool of water.
There is a mystery within meaning and understanding that arose in the very beginning. Out of chaos issued the universe. Out of chaos, the cosmos. One of the daughters of chaos, Night, spawned Nemesis, righter of wrongs, wronger of rights, by virgin birth. Nemesis herself was the personification of the resentment aroused in men by other men who commit crimes with impunity, or who experience inordinate good fortune. The gods themselves were not unaffected by resentment, and thus Nemesis was the most powerful of gods, but without the recognition of gods or men. Nemesis was occasionally worshipped, in the ignorance of men, as two Nemeses, both of whom, like Nemesis, came of virgin birth to the goddess of night. Men's worldly understanding could not see how the opposites could be united within the same being. But in herself, Nemesis was one, and unaffected by the good and the bad. Zeus fell in love with Nemesis, recognizing her power over all that was created, over all that had an opposite. Zeus, himself victim of opposites, fell prey to her dispassionate nature, but she was not interested, and so shunned his advances. Zeus asked Aphrodite, one of his children by Dione, to help him win Nemesis. Aphrodite, in the form of an eagle, pretended to chase Zeus, who had turned into a swan. He took refuge in the lap of Nemesis. Nemesis, through compassion, entered the world of opposites and became overcome in turn by sleep. In that sleep, Nemesis dreamt of the good and of the bad, and this entered her nature. Zeus, in the form of a swan, raped Nemesis, and sometime later, Nemesis bore an egg. Hermes, messenger, deliverer, then took this egg to Leda, wife of the Spartan king Tyndareus. Leda hatched the egg and reared the chick as her own. The chick was Helen, later of Troy, an incarnation of Echo, as Paris, lover of Helen, was himself an incarnation of Narcissus. And as each lost each other through death, the story continued through the ages as they repeatedly found each other and lost each other through successive incarnations. Echo and Narcissus, sound and image, had finally found one another through the medium of tragedy. And therein lies the mystery at the heart of meaning. This is an unreal timepiece. It is the image of a clock, not a clock. In fact, this is a television, and television, like clocks, are timepieces. Tick-tock, tick-tock. This clock can go backwards, as well as forwards. Television stays in the same place, but moves us. Television is a mirror in which we are mirrored, and we are mirrors of our world. This is the image of a clock in a mirror on the TV in our minds. It's time to wake up.